or conned into believing Gacy, who often carried a sheriff's badge and had spotlights on his black Oldsmobile, was a policeman. I feel like this is like a Ted Bundy thing, because Ted Bundy did the same thing with police badges. Is there like a serial killer like chat room where they're like, hey, this totally works? Because if you think about it, Gacy and Bundy and Dahmer, they were all active around the same time. All of them. Like, that's intense. Obviously, they never met up and worked together because they were all in different states. But at the same time, they were all active at the exact same time, which is like crazy. Hold on, I'm trying to clean up this blue that's smearing badly. Whew. It'll look like I have a black eye if I don't fix it. There we go. Super pigmented palette, which is so what I wanted, especially for Pride right now. By the way, this is the new palette. It's called Be Proud, and it looks like this. And I am obviously using it to create my Pride looks from here on out because it's super pigmented and looks amazing. Anyway, his usual MO was to ply a youth with drink, drugs, or generally gain his trust. He would then proceed to, or produce a pair of handcuffs as to show a magic trick that he would claim was part of his, like, clowning act. He would then, he typically cuffed his own hands behind his back, then released himself with the key, which he held between his fingers when his victims were manacled and unable to free himself. Gacy then made a statement to the effect that the trick is you have to have the key. He would then rape and torture his victims. Torture included, but was not limited to, burning with cigars, making his captive imitate a horse as he sat on their back and pulled up on makeshift reins around their necks, and sodomy with foreign objects such as dildos and prescription bottles. He was known to have dragged or forced victims to crawl into his bathroom, where he partly drowned them in the bathtub before repeatedly reviving them, enabling him to prolong their assault. He murdered his victims by placing a rope tourniquet around their neck before progressively tightening the rope with a hammer handle. Except for his final two victims, all were murdered between the hours of 3 and 6 a.m. I'm saying that backwards, sorry. After death, Gacy usually stored the victims' bodies under his bed for up to 24 hours before burying his victim in the crawl space, where he periodically poured quicklime to hasten the decomposition of his victims' bodies. So sad. Some victims' bodies were taken to his garage and embalmed prior to their burial. I guess he thought maybe it would help with smell. I don't know if it did. I wasn't there. Gacy's first known murder was on January 3rd, 1972. He lured Timothy Jack McCoy, 16, from the Greyhound bus terminal into his car. Gacy took McCoy on a sightseeing tour of Chicago and then drove him to his home with the promise that he could spend the night and be driven back to the station in time to catch the bus. Prior to McCoy's identification, he was simply known as the Greyhound busboy. Gacy's second victim was around January of 1974. The victim remains unidentified. Gacy strangled him and then placed the body in his closet before burial. He later stated that bodily fluids leaked from the victim's mouth and nose, staining his carpet. So gross. I just feel so bad for these kids. On July 31st, 1975, John Butkovich, 18, disappeared. Butkovich confronted Gacy over back pay he was due, and Gacy invited him into his car and then back to his home to settle the issue of overdue wages. At his home, Gacy offered John a drink, then conned him into allowing his wrists to be cuffed behind his back. Gacy later strangled him. He stowed John's body in the garage, intending to bury him under the crawl space. But when his wife and stepdaughters returned home earlier than expected, Gacy buried John's body under the concrete floor of the tool room extension of his garage and an empty space where he had initially intended to dig a drain tile. So that is like a tile of like your garage that has a drain in the ground so that like you can wash away oil or fluids or whatever you need to wash away. 1 month after his divorce was finalized, Gacy abducted and murdered Darrell Sampson, who was 18 at the time. After returning to... he was last seen alive on April 6, 1976 in Chicago. And Gacy buried him under the dining room with a section of cloth lodged in his throat. This was how he was like trying to stop leakage. I swear, if you guys don't stop barking at nothing. On May 14th, Randall Reffitt, 15, disappeared shortly after returning to his uptown home from a dental appointment. Hours later, on the same day, Samuel Stapleton, 14, vanished as he walked home from his sister's apartment. Both were buried together in the crawl space, and investigators believe the two were murdered the same evening. So sad. It's so freaking sad. June 3rd, Gacy killed Michael Bonin, 17. He strangled Michael with a ligature and buried him... Ooh. Sorry, let me fix that. Ooh. And buried him in a common grave in the crawl space. And buried him under the spare bedroom. 10 days later, Gacy murdered William Carroll, 16, and buried him in a common grave in the crawl space. Carroll seems to have been the first of 4 victims known to have been murdered between June 13th and August 6, 1976. 3 were between 16 and 17 years old, and one unidentified murder victim appears to have been an adult. So friggin' sad. August 5th, James Hawkinson, 16, was last known to have phoned his family, possibly from Gacy's home. James died of suffocation. His body was buried in the crawl space beneath the body of Rick Johnston, 17, who was last seen alive on August 6th. Now, I had trouble understanding how they could say he was buried under Rick Johnston, because Rick Johnston was killed after him. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if Rick Johnston was killed second, then he would be under Rick's body because Rick would have been put in last, if that makes sense. Gacy is thought to have murdered 2 further unidentified males between August and October of 1976. On October 24th, Gacy abducted and killed teenage friends Kenneth Parker, 16, and Michael Marino, 14. The 2 were last seen outside a restaurant in Chicago. Two days later, William Bundy, 19, disappeared after informing the family he was to attend a party. Bundy died of suffocation, and Gacy buried his body under his master bedroom. He apparently had worked for Gacy at some point. Between November and December of 1976, Gacy murdered Francis Alexander, 21. His last contact with his family was a phone call he made to his mother in November. Alexander was buried in the crawl space directly beneath the room Gacy used as his office. Now, it's interesting to note that Alexander only was identified last year in 2021 because of DNA genealogy type stuff that they were doing. He was never reported missing because his family just believed that he must have moved to California or ran off or something. I mean, he was an adult, so they had no reason to be worried about tracking him down or anything, which I think is just crazy intense. But I kind of understand it because, as they said, he was an adult, so they had no reason to be, keeping tabs on him 24/7, you know. December of 1976, Gregory Godzik, 17, disappeared. His girlfriend last saw him outside her house after he had driven her home following a date. January 20th, 1977, Gacy lured John Cizik, 19, to his home on the pretext of buying his Plymouth Satellite. He confessed to strangling John in his spare bedroom, claiming Rossi was asleep in the house the following morning, and Gacy sold the car to Rossi for $300. March 15th, John Prestige 20 disappeared. Gacy murdered one additional unidentified youth and buried him in the crawl space in the spring or early summer of 1977. On July 5th, Gacy killed a 19-year-old from Crystal Lake, Matthew Bowman. The following month, Rossi was arrested for stealing gasoline while driving John's car. The police did not pursue the matter further, although they did inform John's mother that her son had sold his car. By the end of 1977, Gacy had murdered 6 more young men between the ages of 16 and 21. The first of these victims was Robert Gilroy, 18, the son of a Chicago police sergeant, last seen alive on September 15th. Now, there's been a couple of times that I was reading that he would get away with murdering, like, kids of police. And I'm like, if y'all had just put him in jail the first time he was accused of molesting somebody in Chicago, we wouldn't have been in this situation. Just saying. I mean, it's still sad, but I'm just saying, like, they could have saved themselves a lot of heartache. Last seen alive on September 15th. He was buried in the crawl space. September 12th, Gacy had flown to Pennsylvania to supervise a remodeling project and did not return to Chicago until September 16th. 10 days after Gilroy was last seen, a former U.S. Marine, John Mowbray, 19, disappeared after leaving his mother's house. Gacy strangled Mowbray and buried his body underneath the master bedroom. Now, it is super important to note here that it was stated that he was out of town when Gilroy was murdered, which corroborates Gacy's statements at some point that he made to police about having an accomplice or somebody that he was working with. Because, as we said, he was out of state when Gilroy was murdered and buried. There was a thought that maybe the young men that were living in his home with him were his accomplices, but they could never find anything to kind of corroborate that. So they don't know if Gacy had an accomplice or if he just lied or if maybe one of the kids helped participate while they were living with him because, you know, they were threatened with their own lives or what. But the fact of the matter is that he was out of town when Gilroy was murdered and disposed of. So, so there's some kind of thoughts that yes, he may have had help. On October 17th, Russell Nelson, 21, disappeared. He was last seen outside a Chicago bar. Gacy murdered him and buried him underneath the guest bedroom. 4 weeks later, Gacy murdered Robert Wench, 16, and buried him in the crawl space. November 18th, Tommy Bowling, 20, disappeared after leaving a Chicago bar. 3 weeks after that, U.S. Marine David Talsma, 19, disappeared after informing his mother he was to attend a rock concert in Hammond, Indiana. Gacy strangled David with a ligature and buried him in the crawl space, close to the body of John Mowbray. December 30th, Gacy abducted Robert Donnelly, 19, from a Chicago bus stop at gunpoint. He raped, tortured, and repeatedly dunked Robert's head into a bathtub until he passed out. Robert reported the assault, and Gacy admitted to having a consensual sex slave relationship with Robert, but said he didn't pay him the money he promised him. The police believed Gacy, and no charges were filed. I mean, he's already murdered a bunch of people at this point, but you could have just stopped it in its tracks right there. But they believed him because they really believed it was a dispute over him not paying for the sexual favors that he received. And I really honestly couldn't figure out if Robert Donnelly was like a male prostitute or what. But, I mean, it shouldn't matter. It's still a person who's telling you that somebody is assaulting him, and you've got all these missing kids and you're just not doing anything about it? Not doing a damn thing about it at all? Okay then, if that's what you feel like doing, I guess. The following month, Gacy killed William Kindred, 19. William was the final victim Gacy buried in the crawl space. On March 21st, Gacy abducted, tortured, and dumped Jeffrey Rignall, 26, alive but unconscious. He reported the attack, but the police didn't investigate Gacy. He was later arrested for this assault on July 15th. He faced trial for battery against Jeffrey. By 1978, the crawl space had no room for further bodies. Gacy later said he considered storing bodies in his attic, but was worried about complications arising from the leakage. He chose to dispose of his victims off the I-55 bridge into the Des Plaines River. Gacy said he threw 5 bodies into this river in 1978, believing that at least one of them landed on a, barge. I'm guessing maybe a trash barge is what he was talking about. But only 4 bodies were ever found, which if it did land on a trash barge and that trash barge went to, the middle of the fucking ocean somewhere, then that would make sense why they never found the 5th body. That was creepy. Don't do that, cat. First was Timothy O'Rourke, 20. November 4th was Frank Langdon, 19. November 24th was James Mazara, 20. December 11th, Robert Peist, 15, disappeared. He was murdered shortly after 10 p.m. Gacy admitted to receiving a business call while Robert lay dying, suffocating on his bedroom floor. The first search was executed on December 13th. They found several police badges, a 6mm Beretta starter pistol, syringes and hypodermic needles, handcuffs, several books on homosexuality and pederasty, several pornographic films, capsules of amyl nitrate, and an 18-inch dildo. A 39-inch 2x4 with holes drilled into each end, bottles of Valium and atropine, and several driver's license, as well as a blue hooded parka and underwear too small to fit Gacy. They also found a class of 1975 Maine West High School ring engraved with the initials JAS. They also recovered a Nissan Pharmacy photo receipt alongside a 36-inch section of nylon rope. They confiscated Gacy's Oldsmobile and other PDM work vehicles. On December 20th, Gacy drunkenly confessed to his lawyers that Robert was dead. He's dead. He's in a river. End quote. He proceeded to give a rambling confession that ran into the early hours of the following morning. He said he buried most of his victims in his crawl space and had disposed of 5 other bodies in the Des Plaines River. Gacy dismissed his victims as, quote, male prostitutes, hustlers, and liars, to whom he gave the rope trick, adding he sometimes awoke to find dead, strangled kids on his floor with their hands cuffed behind their back. End quote. The police finally found human remains in his crawl space, and Gacy was arrested and charged with murder on December 22nd of 1978. He was tried for 33 murders on February 6, 1980, and he was sentenced to death for each and every count. Gacy's death was confirmed at 12:58 a.m. on May 10, 1994, and his brain was removed. His brain is in the possession of a defense for a witness for the defense who studies the psychology of what makes serial killers, I guess. A crowd estimated at over and his execution date was set for June 2nd. Only 28 victims were identified, the youngest being Samuel and Michael, both 14. The eldest was Francis and Russell, both 21. Now, seeing that in the later segment of Wikipedia had me a little confused, because I could have sworn that we mentioned, and now I know for sure, that there was a 26-year-old victim. And I wonder if it's that they were considered the oldest because they were identified, whereas the 26-year-old victim's body was not identified. So I don't know. But anyway, the eldest was Francis and Russell, both 21. 5 victims were never identified. The first to be identified were John Butkovich, John Cizik, and Gregory Godzik. James Mazara was identified the following day, and Rick Johnston was exhumed and identified on January 1st of 1979. And as I said, Francis Alexander was only identified last year by DNA genealogy, which I think is very interesting, because that's how they're solving a lot of crimes now. But this is the look for bisexual Flag Pride. Be sure to come back later tonight and join me while I get ready for the Pride Night baseball game. And next week, I am doing Jeffrey Dahmer, but if you have any suggestions for any cases I should do after that, please feel free to send them to my inbox, and I will definitely look into them and see if there's a segment that I can make out of them. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you later on.